Hello, so it's Michael here, and this would be part 8 of the inventory system tutorial. So in the last episode, as a quick run through, what we've done is created a chest. Well, we switched to a line trace based system for picking up the interactables, and we created this container that we can interact with that then displays some UI to show the item in the inventory. So at the moment we don't have any way of putting any items in this container, and hopefully in this part we're going to be kind of getting to that so we can transfer items to and from the containers. So let's jump in. So let me just double check where we're at. So that's the container. Let's open up the UI in here. Actually, I suppose the first thing we probably want to do is set up a way of being able to actually add items to the inventory by default. So I'm not wanting to really go down the route of loop tables, certainly not in this episode anyway. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a child of the inventory system. Do I want to create a child? Actually, no, I'm not going to. Instead, I'm just going to add it to the main inventory system itself. So, in essence, what we want to do is create some logic on begin play that will create some items for us in the inventory system if they're denoted. So, for us to be able to define an item, we have to create the object just as we do in here. So in the item, some begin play, we get the item object. So that's handled in the construction script. So just as a reminder, so this is where we create the item object and then set its quantity. So we kind of want to do something similar in here. So what I'm going to do is want to do it as an array, although we could do with a custom structure. So in the inventory system, that's on the content browser, we're going to go ahead and create a new structure. So under blueprint, the structure, and I'm going to call this one struct underscore item. Yeah, I'll just do it as item for now. So we'll open that up, and we want to add, well, we want two variables. The first one's going to be the item base. I want to do that as a soft class reference, and we'll call it item class. And then the next one I want to do is an integer, so that's going to be the quantity. So that's how many quantity. So that's so. And then we'll close out the world item. So go back to the inventory system. So we want to add a new variable here, and that wants to be the structure type we've just created. So struct type item. And we're going to go ahead and make that an array. We can go ahead and set that to instance editable as well, which means if we select the chest in the level and click on the inventory system component, we should be able to see that variable, and we can add some elements to it. I do want to quickly rename that though, so we'll call that desired items. So with that done, we can then come in and check if it's empty. So is empty. Oh, do is not empty. Okay. So if it's not empty, we can come in and want to do a for each loop on this. For each loop. And we can actually just split that, and we can do an async. Do I do async load? No. Let's do a resolve first, see if it's loaded. If it is valid. And I want to do load. I'm going to do the asset blocking, so this one will actually stall. Well, it sort of stalls the game thread until it's loaded. Sometimes that can cause hitches depending on how big the thing is that's being loaded. So it is valid class, so if it's not, we can do an async load. Not an async load, do a asset blocking load. And if it is valid, what I want to do is construct object. Now I'm actually just going to select all this and just collapse into a function and call that create desired items. And the reason why is because I just want to promote this to a local variable. I'm just going to call that one loop class. So we do just need to cast to the item base on the asset blocking one, like so. So all we're doing here is just setting that loop class variable to the loaded class essentially. And then once we've done that, we can connect both of those exec paths up to the construct node, and we want to plug in that loop class. And once we've done that, we can then want to set the quantity, and that's going to be the quantity from the loop. Like so, and then once we've done that, we kind of got two options. You can choose the add item object, which will add it as is, or alternatively you can choose the add item. So you got to remember the add item object is just adds it as is, whereas the add item modifies the quantities and does the various stacking and whatnot. So I'm going to choose the add item. So you kind of got a bit of flexibility there in terms of what you want to choose to do, depending on what it is you're trying to achieve. Now, that itself should be complete. So I'm going to select the chest in the level, and I'm going to add a few items. So I'll add a cylinder, I'll add 4 of those, I'll add another one, which will be a health potion, I'll add 2 of those. So now if we test it, you'll see now that they are showing up in there. So the 4 cylinders and the health potions. And again, if we pick up some of these items here, those will show as well, so we can see both of those side by side. Okay, so we've got that. So the next thing we want to sort of look at is actually being able to transfer one item to another. Now this is where things can get a little bit more complex. So in the inventory system itself, so the inventory system component, I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this one transfer item. And what we want to do you want to do it on the inventory system? Just wondering if it might be best to put it in the item base. Actually, yeah, I'm going to delete that from the inventory system. I'm going to do it on the item base instead. The reason why is this will just make it a little bit easier to transfer an item from one inventory to another, because that way we only need to be, if we've got a reference to the item object and the inventory we want it to go into, it's a little bit easier to facilitate that. So what we can do, so the item base, we'll do transfer inventory, and here we just want to input, we want to add an input to the inventory system. And I'm going to name that target inventory. So this is the inventory system that we want to transfer this item to. So what we want to do is we double check a few things. So when we go to add an item, come in, add item object, set the owner of the inventory, does it there. Okay, so what we want to do is first check to make sure that the target inventory is valid. If it is, we'll just get the target inventory. We want to get the owning inventory, so the one that currently owns this. Just check to make sure that they're not equal. Because again, if it's already in the target inventory, then we don't need to do anything. Okay, so if it is, we can remove item. Remove item object, is that the one we want? Double check. Yep. So here for the item object we can just do self. So in this example the item object is removing itself from the relevant inventory. I want to do a quick check there, so if it was successful we can then get the target inventory and add item. Now as I'm looking at this, we probably actually want to swap these around. So yeah, so what I'm going to do, yeah, I'm going to do it that way. So I'm going to do add item first, check to see if it was successfully added to the new inventory. If it was, we'll then remove it from what it was currently in. Well, is that going to work? Let's have a quick check. So what we need to do is kind of distinguish whether or not the quantity was added to another item object, or whether or not it added the whole object itself. So what we can do is actually get the target inventory and check on its owning inventory again. So kind of like what we did here. We want to check if they are now the same. So again, if they are the same, we don't need to do anything. So I'll quickly run that through you. So if we come through and we modify the quantity here, so we're adding the quantity from this item object to another one in the inventory, then we never update the owner of the original item object. But if we do, we end up adding the item object itself, then the item owner, so the owning inventory, that itself would update to the inventory that we've just added it to. So we can kind of use that to help distinguish whether or not we need to remove it from the old one or not. And then we can do a return on here as well. So we're sending a return value to this particular function. And this will just denote whether or not it was successfully transferred. Now there may be an instance here where we transfer it to the new one and then it fails to remove the item object here. So you kind of got two choices where we could attempt to re-add it. So we could attempt to remove it from the one we've just added it to, but then you can end up with another similar issue. In a lot of cases here, because the way it's set up, as long as the item's in there, it should be added. So I'm just going to do a return like that. I think just ignore the return value there. Over here, we can do a return value of false. So if the target inventory isn't valid, then the transfer wasn't successful. If the target inventory and the owning inventory are the same, you kind of got your own choice there as to how it is you want to handle that. For me, I'm going to do that as returning false on the return value, just to symbolize that it's not done anything. You may want to return true because the item's already there. That might be a desired attempt. So again, it's up to you how you want to handle that. So that's the transfer inventory function. So that should be working. What we now need to do is look at setting it up so we can facilitate the actual transfer, as it were. So just open up the inventory container widget and the item container widget. So I just want to double check a few things. So on the item container, when we initialize the inventory, that's when we create the item entry widget. And I'll quickly open that one as well. Now we have some logic on there for the input key down when it's focused, and that's currently set to E. So the way that this is currently set up does mean that we would be able to use the items directly from the chest. So for example, the health potion, it's hovered. If we press E or not, interesting. Let me quickly check that. Okay, lovely. Yeah, so that's not working, which is great. For a second I thought it would. Let me just double check. I understand why. Need the health potion. Yeah, so it's because we get the owning inventory and then we get the owner from that, and then we cast to the third person character. So because the chest isn't third person character, it doesn't function. But there may be instances where that could still become a problem. So we are going to have to look at better organizing the on key down within the item entry to better handle and facilitate that. So what I'm going to do, so I've got the item container, we kind of need to funnel the key press from the active item, it's the one that we're currently hovering over, and we need to kind of funnel that down into the inventory container, because depending on which side it's from is going to kind of determine how it is we then handle it. So on the item entry, I'm going to go ahead and add an event dispatcher, and we're going to call that one on item focused. And I'm going to add an input to that, so that's going to be the item object base. So if we go to the event graph, we have the added to focus path and remove from focus path. And what we want to do is when we actually add it to the focus path, well, when it's added, we want to call that on item focused, and we want to pass in the item object that is this particular item entry is represented. So what we can actually do, I'm going to actually unhook this for now and just return unhandled. We may come back to this, but the reason why I'm removing it now is so that we can actually handle this behavior further down the line. So instead of it being handled directly in the item entry, it will be handled in either the inventory container or the inventory main widgets. So that way we have a bit more control as to how we handle those inputs depending on what actual UI menu is that we have open at the time. So now we've got the event dispatcher here that's going to return the item object that's currently in focus essentially, we need to actually do some binding to that so we can do something. So in the item container widget, where we actually create the item entries for each of the items in the specific inventory, we do need to do a binding to it. Now, one thing that we can do is here, when we actually create it, we can bind straight to the on item focused. So every time this creates a widget, one of those item entry widgets, it's going to create a binding to that on item focused. And create an event. And I'm just going to create a matching function for now. I'll rename that in a second. Now I just want to think in terms of removing them. So initialize, okay, yeah. Item object removed, we remove from parent, set focus, okay. So going back to the item entry widget, for now, what I'm going to do on the event destruct, so this is when the widget's destroyed, the on item focused, I'm going to do an unbind all. Yeah, sometimes there may be some cases where you might not always want to unbind when it's destroyed, particularly if you're flicking through, well, let's say you've got like a widget switcher and you're deciding you're going to switch between them, you might not always want to do it this way. So if you're choosing not to, for whatever reason, just make sure that it is still something you do need to make sure you're unbinding when you've kind of finished. So say the inventory menu is closed, for example, just because the binding would still be active and it can sometimes cause problems that you might not realize. So just having it unbind them, in this example when it's destroyed, can just help prevent that. Okay, so I've just gone back to the item container. So that's where we've added the on item focused binding. That's in the initialize inventory function. So we've created the function that we bind to it. And I'm going to go ahead and rename that to item focus changed. And obviously that does return the item object in question. The next thing I want to do is kind of similar to the item entry, and that's just add another event dispatcher. So on item focus changed. And this is kind of just going to serve as a kind of like a relay essentially. So we get it from the item container to the main thing that the container's in. And again, we want to add an input to that of item base. Object. Let's do a quick refresh on there and connect those up. Just like so. So now whenever we call the on item focused, it's going to call the on item focused changed event dispatcher in the item container, which means what we can now do inside the inventory container, we can actually bind to these ourselves. So you kind of have two options. So the containers themselves, because they are widgets, they do show up in the variables tab. You can see that event dispatcher on the bottom here. So we can actually add those in and we could choose to do something on them. Now for me, I am going to just keep track of whichever one is currently being focused. So I'm just going to put it to a variable, currently focused item, like so. Now this is the inventory container, so the only thing I want to sort of consider doing on this one is just transferring items from one to the other. So if you click on one of the items to move it to the other inventory and vice versa. So these for now are just going to be the same. So go to the on key down, so I've got a few things in here already. So we're just going to add another one on here. So at the moment, this is what handles closing the inventory with the I key. So if the key that's pressed, however, isn't I, you can come in and instead check, is the pressed key E? And if it is, we want to get the focused item and then we want to transfer inventory. And do a branch on there. If successful, we'll mark it as handled. Now, one last thing that we kind of need here is to actually denote what the target inventory is going to be. So that kind of requires us to know which side it's on. So again, in here we can just add a little variable. If it was a bool, so do is player owned. So now the item container, so if it's the top one, that's just a normal container, so it's not player owned. It is, we'll do that one, and we'll do a T. So we've kind of got a way we can switch. We can use that to sort of distinguish. We use a select named here. Now we still actually need to get the inventories themselves. However, if you remember, when we actually do the initialize inventory where we pass them through, we never actually store a reference to the inventories anywhere. So in this particular example, that's exactly what we're going to do. So in the initialize inventory, we're just going to promote it to a variable. So that was the primary. Actually, we'll sort that out in a second. We're just thinking that name of that ball should probably be something different with us using primary and secondary in here. Secondary inf and primary inf. And I'm just going to reconnect these using the actual variables as well, just to get rid of some of these lines. So, and the is player owned. Yeah, I'm going to rename that to is primary, just so we know that it's from the primary inventory. Yeah, that's good. Right, so so go back to the on key down. Now we can just plug in the variables. Just like so. Now that itself should be working. So if we have one of those selected and then we press E, it's not doing anything. So let's figure out why. So toggle breakpoint, what have I missed? So it's jumping to it, okay. So E key, okay. So it's going to there. And then it's failing on the transfer inventory, okay. So we'll start that again. And we'll track this through instead. For that, it's false, not equal. So the owning infantry, target infantry are the same. Okay, yep, so it's showing that they're the same, so if I got these the wrong way around. Yes, I have. So swap those around. So it's trying to transfer the item to its container it's already in. So now if we try it, remove breakpoint. It still doesn't look like that's working. So let's have another look. Okay, for some reason it's setting them to both. Well, it's setting the owning inventory to the player. So give me a few minutes and I will quickly figure out what's going off, and then I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I think I've figured out what the issue is, and it's inside the transfer inventory button. So here after we've added the item, we check to see if the target inventory and the owning inventory are the same. And if you notice, instead of an equals, it's a not equals. So we'll just quickly sort that around, and hopefully that should resolve the issue. Okay, so that is working. It's just not updating so far. So there's still a slight issue there. So what's going off here? So more problems. Okay. Well, the first thing we want to do is set something up to actually update the UI when there's a change to the inventory. So that's probably the first thing we want to do, because I'll just make troubleshooting some of these problems a little bit easier. Inside the item container, we do already have the onItemRemoved, which calls the item object removed, where it essentially goes through and finds the relevant widget and removes it. Now we kind of want something similar when we add an item, which at the moment we don't currently have. So on the inventory system itself, we're going to do onItemAdded, and we want to add an input to that of the item base. So, and then when we add an item, we're going to do that based on the item object itself. So when we do that and we've updated owner, we can call through and just call that item added function. Like so. Now going back to the item container, we kind of want to create a binding for that when an item's added. So we've just added that in, and we want to create an event, a matching one. I'm going to go ahead and call this one item object added. And what we can actually do is we effectively just want to try and do something similar with this. So we want to create the widget, create the focus, add it to the container. We do need to sort out its padding as well. So I've just copied and pasted that over now. Now, if you kind of remember back, we added this little section here that adds some padding to the bottom, but that's only if it's not the last one, essentially. So if it's the last one, then it adds some padding to it. Now, in this example, obviously because we're adding to it, it's always going to be the last one, so we don't actually need to add any padding. However, any of the previous the previously last one is no longer last, so it does need some padding added to the bottom of it. So what we probably want to do is get child, and so we essentially just want to get the last one, get child count. Get all children, get child at, get child count, there we go. And then we just want to -1 from that. We do want to get that as vertical box. So slot as vertical box. And that's going to be the padding we had there, and I believe it was 8 to the bottom. Now, in this instance, because we actually add it there, it's not going to be the very last one, it's going to be the one below it, so we're actually going to change that 1 to a -2. So now when we add a new item to an inventory, it should update the relevant container. So let's quickly test that. See if it works. Okay, yeah, so it's adding it to the inventory, but doesn't seem to be removing it from here. Well, we did get some access none. Okay, so what I want to do it is valid on that. That might happen if there's nothing else in the inventory, so it's added the first one, and it might still give me a message. No, just returns it valid. Okay. Okay, so we've got that. So as I mentioned, it does look like there seems to be an issue with when the item objects are removed. So that's this logic here, which is what we now need to update. So let me just double check to make sure that that's actually being fired. No, it's not. Okay, so it's nothing to do with that. So it makes me wonder if it's an issue with the remove item object. So let's toggle a breakpoint. And we know it's the chest container, so I've just selected that preemptively. Okay, it's not actually, doesn't seem to be getting that far at all. Okay, so I had a little poke around to figure out what the issue was with it not removing the items after transferring. So the issue is that when we actually go to add the item and we add the whole item object, it never actually removes it from its previous inventory. That's kind of how we've set the logic up at the moment. So what we need to do is address that. In the item base, instead, before we do anything, get the owning inventory, just check to make sure they're not equal. And if they're not, we want to remove start the branch. So if they're not equal, we want to get the current owning inventory and remove item object. Which would be just self for the item object. And then once we've done that, we can then actually update the new item owner to the input on the item owner. Right, so now go back to the transfer inventory. That does mean that this is still needed. Yes. Lovely. Okay, so if we give that a try now. There we go. So now we are transferring items between inventories. So I can pick these up all in the main inventory. I can pop a few in, close it out, and drop some that I've got. Like so. There. Okay, so we do have a few of these access none messages. And that's in regards to the owning inventory not being valid, which may be the case, so we can just do a validator get on there. So if it's not a valid one, It doesn't do anything. I'm just going to switch this over to a sequence instead. So that way, regardless of what happens up here, it'll still update the only inventory to the new one. Okay, and that should address those access no messages. So one last test just to make sure there's no other messages. Transfer those over. You can drop them. Just empty. Transfer them back over. Lovely. Now, because of the change we made earlier, our health potions are no longer usable. So I want to quickly address that, and then that will be it for today's episode, I think. So, you remember what we've done is in the inventory container, when we initialized, sorry, not when we initialized, we added an event for the on-item focus changed, and that's how we kind of now control it through here. So we kind of need to do the same thing in the inventory main. So on the item container, item focus. And in this instance, generally we'd only be using it to show the player's inventory. So we can just focused item. So we don't need to worry about anything else here. Over to the on key down. So what we want to do is just add the same logic that we had on the on key down. So that's this usable stuff here. Now we'll copy the handle events as well. And it's not letting me copy any better. Why is that? Okay, let's try copying that again. That doesn't seem to copy over very well. There we go. So we do need to update the item object to the focused item. But we do also need to check that key as well. So change that to the E key. So if it's the E key, we can then check, is the focused item a usable item? If it is, do something else. Generally, focused items should be valid, but the inventory itself might be empty. So we're just going to set that to and is valid, a validated get. So now, just that quick change, we should be up and running again with the using the potions. You see that flashes up. Obviously, I've not lowered the health. But if you go into here, pressing E, instead of using the item, it just transfers it to a different inventory. So yeah, so that's that. Obviously, there's still a lot more we can do with this. As I said, transferring items, things do get quite complicated. For example, as you can see, we've transferred over everything one inventory to the other, but now nothing gets focused, so we kind of have to re-engage the focus by pressing tab, and which obviously isn't ideal. So we kind of need to do some checks for that as well to see if we need to refocus somewhere else and things like that. But I say for this particular episode, I would say we're all sorted. So we got to the point where we were able to pick items up and pop them in an inventory and transfer them. So yeah. So I just want to say thanks for watching. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you have any questions or anything like that, just by all means drop a comment. If it's more of a complicated question or you need a bit more help for whatever reason, obviously I do have a Discord, so by all means jump on there. Generally it tends to be a little bit easier to help when you're able to send some screenshots. Also, I do have a Ko-Fi page, so if you are wanting to support me, you can do so over there. But yeah, I just want to say thanks again and enjoy the rest of your day. So take care. Bye.